the terrifying evolutionary experiment that failed and left no fossils. Beneath a sky thick with primeval clouds, creatures once stranger than imagination carved fleeting dominions across Earth's ancient landscapes. Long before bones could fossilize and wings could soar, evolution dared audacious experiments: colossal insects, walking fish, feathered gliders, and armored predators that vanished almost without trace. Each attempt, brilliant and terrifying, left subtle imprints on ecosystems, shaping prey, plants, and microhabitats in silent testimony to ambition and failure. Across time and vanished worlds, we uncover the hidden history of life's boldest experiments. Glimpsed only through the shadows they left behind, the ghosts of giant insects. The carboniferous skies were not silent. They thrummed with the beating of wings far larger than any modern insect could muster, casting immense, drifting shadows across the dense ferns and towering lycopsids below. Fossilized imprints of dragonfly-like Meganeura reveal wingspans exceeding 70 centimeters, a breadth that would dwarf the largest modern odonates. And yet these creatures navigated the thick, humid air with apparent ease. The very composition of the atmosphere played a pivotal role. Oxygen levels hovered around 35%, nearly one-third higher than present-day concentrations, creating an environment in which tracheal respiration could support far larger bodies than would otherwise be possible. Each flap of these colossal wings was a testament to a world where the physics of flight had been rewritten by chemistry, where the air itself enabled the impossible. The forests below were labyrinths of green pillars, ancient trees stretching 20 meters or more, their trunks encrusted with spore-laden fronds that swayed lazily in the humid breeze. Amid this arboreal jungle, millipedes like Arthropleura scuttled, reaching lengths of over 2 meters, their segmented bodies pressing into the soft, coal-rich soil, leaving tracks that would one day fossilize as the only permanent mark of their presence. Predation, while fierce, operated differently in this age. Giant insects dominated aerial niches with voracious efficiency, preying on smaller arthropods, amphibians, and even each other in brutal contests for territory. Their exoskeletons, reinforced with high concentrations of chitin and calcium, created armor that was remarkably resilient for their size, while simultaneously pushing the limits of structural stability, balancing rigidity with the flexibility needed to power flight. Paleontologists studying the biomechanics of these titanic insects have reconstructed wing musculature and thoracic architecture using exceptionally preserved fossils from European coal deposits, revealing that the stroke amplitude and frequency of Meganeura were close to the upper limits predicted by fluid dynamics for insect flight. These reconstructions suggest that each wing beat not only propelled the insect forward, but also created a complex pattern of lift and vortex interaction, allowing for maneuverability among dense foliage. Yet even as these creatures thrived in a hyper-oxygenated world, their evolutionary experiment contained the seeds of its own demise. As atmospheric oxygen declined during the late Carboniferous and Permian, the respiratory efficiency that once allowed these monsters to soar began to falter, constraining their metabolism and limiting the size that could be supported by passive diffusion alone. In addition to oxygen constraints, predation pressures and competition imposed subtle but significant selection forces. Fossil evidence from contemporaneous faunal assemblages indicates that early amphibians, many of which could navigate both land and shallow waters, increasingly occupied ecological niches that overlapped with those of the giant insects. Species like Crassigyrinus, elongated and aquatic, may have preyed on larval stages, indirectly influencing adult populations. These pressures combined with fluctuating climate cycles that periodically altered humidity and temperature, created a precarious balance that could not sustain gigantism indefinitely. Unlike vertebrate lineages, which could adapt through physiological innovations such as endothermy or advanced lung systems, insects were constrained by the fundamental limits of tracheal diffusion, leaving no evolutionary escape hatch once environmental parameters shifted. Fossilized forest soils, coal beds, and impression layers provide indirect testimony to this lost world, even as the insects themselves left no bones behind. The absence of mineralized skeletal material means that much of what is known comes from wing impressions, trackways, and occasionally the delicate preservation of exoskeletal fragments in fine-grained sediments. Researchers analyzing these patterns have inferred life history traits such as developmental timing, growth rates, and even aspects of behavior. For instance, the size disparity between early instars and adults in Meganeura suggests a rapid post-molt expansion, a risky strategy in predator-rich ecosystems. The largest insects likely required extended larval stages in protective microhabitats. This vulnerability would have made them sensitive to even minor habitat disruptions caused by flooding, volcanic activity, or seasonal droughts. The ecological footprint of these oversized insects extended beyond predation. Their feeding habits influenced the composition of vegetation, dispersal of spores, and nutrient cycling within swampy carboniferous forests. Dragonfly relatives, some spanning nearly a meter in wingspan, would have been apex aerial predators, shaping prey behaviors and forcing smaller arthropods and early amphibians into complex hiding strategies. In doing so, they orchestrated an intricate web of interdependencies, a fleeting chapter in evolutionary history whose subtle traces can be detected in paleoecological reconstructions and sediment analyses. Geochemical markers, such as isotopic ratios of carbon and oxygen in coal seams, hint at the intensity of these ecosystems, providing a backdrop against which the scale and rapidity of the insect's rise and decline can be appreciated. Beyond mechanics and ecology, there is a philosophical gravity to the story of the giant insects, a reminder that evolution is as much about failed experiments as successful ones. Unlike the fossilized dinosaurs that would later dominate textbooks and imagination, these titanic insects vanished almost entirely, leaving only impressions, tracks, and subtle chemical signals in sediment layers. They were creatures that tested the upper limits of life within a world chemically and physically unlike our own, flourishing for perhaps millions of years before atmospheric changes and ecological constraints extinguished their rule. They exist today only as shadows in stone, echoes of a reality that was once vibrant, dangerous, and magnificently disproportionate. As the sun would have filtered through the dense prehistoric canopy, highlighting the translucent veins of a wing spanning more than half a meter, these giants would have traced arcs across the sky, unseen ancestors of later aerial life. And yet, as their evolutionary experiment ended abruptly, the stage remained set for other lineages to attempt similarly ambitious strategies, this time on land, where the struggle for size, speed, and dominance would continue in forms both transient and, occasionally, fossilizable. From these looming shadows of oversized wings, the story of life's audacious experiments shifts seamlessly to terrestrial domains, where creatures once constrained to the ground would embark on their own brief but spectacular evolutionary gambits, leaving ephemeral marks upon an ever-changing world. The walking sharks. Beneath the rippling waterline, a pair of cartilaginous fins pressed tentatively against the muddy substrate, testing the fragile boundary between fluid and solid, as if the very earth dared the creatures to step beyond their aquatic dominion. Long before the first tetrapods fully claimed the land, some Devonian sharks and their relatives began experimenting with movement on substrates that could support their weight, a fleeting evolutionary performance preserved only in indirect traces and imaginative reconstructions. Fossil sediments, often in the form of fine-grained mudstone and silt, hint at brief excursions across tidal flats and river margins, where delicate impressions of fin edges and minor depressions betray a story that skeletal remains cannot tell. The water in these environments, shallow and brimming with oxygen-rich pockets, provided both opportunity and peril, allowing partial terrestrial locomotion, but exposing the fish to predators and environmental volatility in equal measure. Paleontologists examining these ancient sites have inferred the presence of weight-bearing behaviors through subtle sedimentary cues, asymmetric grooves, parallel scratches, and occasional overlapping depressions suggesting sequential placement of pectoral and pelvic fins. These patterns, although rarely fossilized with clarity, correspond to anatomical reconstructions of early chondrichthyans like Cladocellaceae and other primitive cartilaginous lineages. Fin rays in these species, reinforced with fibrous cartilage and sometimes calcified nodes, show a capacity to support a fraction of body weight temporarily, enabling cautious excursions across mudflats in search of prey or refuge. Yet these adaptations came with significant limitations. Prolonged exposure to air risked desiccation of gill tissues, while the energy expenditure for terrestrial movement strained muscular and metabolic systems not yet optimized for land. Muscle fibers, reconstructed from exceptionally preserved Devonian fossils, reveal an intriguing versatility. Unlike modern fish, whose pectoral and pelvic musculature primarily support aquatic maneuvering, these early cartilaginous fish possessed a remarkable ability to engage their fins in vertical support, shifting the axial load from swimming strokes to short-lived, weight-bearing steps. Biomechanical models suggest that a fish of moderate size could lift its anterior body several centimeters above the substrate, pivot, and then reposition, producing a motion akin to crawling rather than walking. This behavior, though limited in distance, would have allowed access to shallow pools, stranded invertebrates, or algae-covered surfaces unavailable to strictly aquatic competitors. Even minor excursions like these, however, were precarious. The same adaptations that enabled them also increased vulnerability to dehydration, predation, and sudden environmental changes. The Devonian landscapes themselves shaped these experiments. Estuaries and tidal flats were mosaics of shifting sandbars, mud channels, and ephemeral ponds, punctuated by dense mats of cyanobacteria and primitive vascular plants. Periodic tides exposed substrates for hours at a time, creating a temporal window for terrestrial movement. Yet the unpredictable nature of these events meant that only a fraction of individuals could exploit them successfully. Oxygen gradients within the mud and water further influenced behavior. Shallow waters often became hypoxic during warm seasons, forcing fish to explore the edges of pools or venture temporarily onto land to breathe, feed, or escape competitors. Sedimentology studies suggest that these environmental pressures were a constant filter, favoring fin morphologies capable of both swimming and limited terrestrial support while constraining body size and flexibility. Predatory pressures also shaped this ephemeral experimentation. Amphibians such as Ichthyostega and smaller temnospondyls patrolled the margins of rivers and deltas, preying on stranded fish or vulnerable larvae. Invertebrates, including giant eurypterids and arthropods, prowled both water and substrate, creating a complex predator-prey landscape that rewarded agility and punished over-specialization. The early cartilaginous fish that ventured onto mudflats had to balance the advantage of untapped food resources against the risk of becoming prey themselves, a delicate evolutionary gamble written in sedimentary impressions rather than bones. These interactions hint at a dynamic ecosystem in which evolutionary experimentation occurred in small, transient increments, rarely leaving long-term traces for posterity. Chemical analysis of Devonian mudstones adds another dimension to understanding these fleeting behaviors. Isotopic signatures, including variations in carbon and oxygen ratios, reveal fluctuating salinity, periodic drying, and oxygen variability, all of which would have constrained terrestrial excursions. Fish that could temporarily bear their weight on mudflats were simultaneously navigating a physiologically hostile environment where gill tissues could dry, metabolic rates spiked, and locomotion efficiency decreased. These constraints, compounded by predation and ecological competition, explain why such experiments were short-lived, leaving behind tantalizing yet fragmentary evidence in the geological record. Even the simplest anatomical adaptations illustrate evolutionary ambition and risk. Strengthened fin rays, reinforced pectoral girdles, and subtle modifications of vertebral articulation reflect natural experimentation on the threshold of land. Unlike the sprawling diversity of later tetrapods, these fish represented a temporary test, a trial and error phase where structural innovation met ecological reality. Every movement across exposed mud carried both opportunity and peril, a high-stakes exploration of an uncharted habitat that would ultimately vanish without a trace beyond faint sedimentary hints. Observers can imagine these fish moving with awkward determination, their fins pressing into mud as tidal waters receded, eyes scanning for both food and predator, bodies bridging the boundary between two worlds for mere moments in geologic time. These experiments in locomotion, though transient, foreshadowed the eventual conquest of land by vertebrates, setting the stage for limbs, digits, and skeletal innovations that would endure. The narrative of life's audacity continued. Evolution testing limits, pushing toward new frontiers, yet remaining exquisitely fragile. From the quiet, tentative steps of these aquatic pioneers, the story anticipates future vertebrate lineages venturing even further, attempting yet more dramatic experiments in form and function, yet still susceptible to failure on a scale invisible to the fossil record. The feathered gliders that couldn't fly. High above the damp forest floor, juvenile feathered dinosaurs leapt from branch to branch, wings outstretched yet unable to sustain true flight, their movements suspended between daring ambition and the cruel limits of anatomy. In the dense canopies of the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous, creatures such as Microraptor and Anchiornis extended feathered limbs in hopes of gliding through the arboreal labyrinth, their elongated forelimbs, clawed hands, and tail feathers forming a patchwork of lift that allowed brief arcs through the air. Fossilized impressions preserved in volcanic ash reveal delicate veins, asymmetrical flight feathers, and rachis structures that hint at aerodynamic experimentation. Yet the lack of a fully developed keel or robust musculature kept these gliders tethered to gravity. Each leap, though fleeting, represented an evolutionary experiment at the edge of possibility, a momentary negotiation with the physics of flight that would fail to leave lasting descendants in these lineages. Fossilized feather morphology provides insight into the limitations and potential of these near-flight adaptations. The long primary feathers along forelimbs were stiffened by supportive barbs, while the hind limbs bore secondary feathers that may have functioned as auxiliary airfoils. Some species, such as Yi-Chi, evolved membranous structures supported by elongated wrist bones, an experiment in hybrid flight surfaces that demonstrates evolution's willingness to explore unconventional designs. Aerodynamic modeling suggests that these feathered arrangements allowed gliding at low speeds, with glide ratios sufficient to traverse several meters between branches, but insufficient for powered flapping flight. The glider's capacity for maneuvering was remarkable given their small size, yet each structural innovation carried trade-offs in weight, energy expenditure, and muscular control, underscoring the fragility of these evolutionary trials. Musculoskeletal reconstructions of forelimbs and shoulder girdles highlight the subtle engineering challenges these creatures faced. The elongation of forearms and the development of semi-lunate carpals allowed limited wrist rotation, improving surface orientation mid-glide, while elongated tails served as stabilizers or rudders. Despite these adaptations, the chest musculature remained underdeveloped compared with later avians, limiting the potential for repeated flapping or extended aerial navigation. Bone histology studies indicate rapid growth rates, suggesting that juveniles attempted gliding before full skeletal maturity, a strategy that may have increased risk but allowed behavioral flexibility in foraging or predator avoidance. The glider's survival depended on a delicate balance of agility, timing, and environmental opportunity, leaving no margin for miscalculation. Predatory pressures within the forest canopy shaped behavior as decisively as anatomy. Small arboreal theropods, early mammals, and even larger gliding insects created a competitive environment where misjudged leaps could result in injury or predation. Observations of modern analogues, such as flying squirrels and gliding lizards, provide a comparative framework. Control over trajectory, precise landing, and spatial awareness are as critical as wing morphology. Fossil evidence of healed fractures and missing digits in some specimens suggests that accidents were common, reinforcing the notion that partial gliding was a perilous evolutionary experiment. The ecological interplay of predator, prey, and competitor constrained the expansion of aerial niches, ensuring that these early gliders remained ephemeral players in a complex arboreal theatre. The forest itself imposed additional constraints. Canopy density, wind currents, and the vertical distribution of branches dictated flight paths and landing zones, while seasonal shifts in leaf cover and humidity affected both lift and friction. Paleo-environmental reconstructions from Liaoning Province and other fossil sites indicate that these forests were multi-layered, with fern thickets, conifers, and ginkgos creating labyrinthine obstacles. Gliders had to navigate not only physical barriers, but also microclimatic variation, balancing aerodynamic potential with physiological tolerance to desiccation or thermal stress. Every jump across this three-dimensional maze was a calculated risk, a fleeting trial of structural innovation in an environment that tolerated only precise, yet imperfect, execution. Microscopic examination of fossilized feather barbs reveals a remarkable level of structural specialization, with asymmetrical veins and hooked barbules that suggest early attempts at controlling airflow during glides. Some specimens show a layering of downy and contour feathers, hinting at thermal regulation and subtle adjustments to lift or stability, particularly during low-speed descents. Wing loading calculations based on reconstructed body mass indicate that even minor adjustments in posture or feather angle could dramatically influence glide distance and trajectory, implying that these gliders relied on finely tuned anatomical control rather than brute strength to navigate the forest canopy. In addition, paleobotanical data suggest that dense understory vegetation may have served as both an obstacle and a cushioning landing zone, subtly shaping the evolution of feather morphology through selective pressures on safe landing and maneuverability. Behavioral inferences suggest that gliding may have served multiple purposes beyond locomotion. Fossil distribution patterns imply that juveniles and adults engaged in arboreal hunting, perhaps ambushing insects or small vertebrates, while membranous wing structures could have played roles in display or courtship. Seasonal patterns in fossil deposition hint at temporary congregations in canopy refuges, indicating social or resource-driven motivations for aerial exploration. Yet despite these advantages, evolutionary momentum toward true flight did not materialize in these lineages, demonstrating that partial adaptations, even those allowing impressive feats, could remain evolutionary dead ends. The narrative of near flight also underscores the interplay of innovation and constraint. Feathered gliders represent a bridge between terrestrial locomotion and powered aerial life, an intermediate stage where experimentation met the immutable laws of physics and biology. Each leap, glide, and awkward landing was a rehearsal for future successes, teaching evolution which forms were viable and which would falter. The lineages that mastered powered flight were those that integrated skeletal, muscular, feathered, and behavioral traits into a coordinated system, a synthesis these gliders never fully achieved. Their failure is instructive, illustrating the thin line between ambition and impossibility in evolutionary experimentation. Every failed glide left an imprint not on stone or bone, but on the ecological dynamics of the forest itself. Arboreal prey adjusted their behavior in response to glider predation. Microhabitats shifted under the weight of repeated landings, and selective pressures honed the development of more efficient aerial morphologies. In these subtle ways, even an evolutionary failure can ripple through time, influencing future forms and behaviors. From the near flight of these feathered gliders, the story arcs toward new arenas of experimentation, where aquatic predators, armored and agile, they would test survival strategies in water, a domain equally unforgiving, yet rich with opportunity for evolutionary innovation. The armored ambush predators. Across the sun-dappled floodplains, massive plates and spikes glinted as predators moved with deliberate, ponderous weight, each step pressing into soft mud that had recorded countless ephemeral histories before. These creatures, ranging from early ankylosaurian ancestors to placodonts and heavily armored temnospondyls, experimented with extreme body reinforcement as a strategy for dominance, seeking to overwhelm prey through brute force protection rather than speed or cunning. In this world, evolutionary ambition manifested as an almost architectural obsession with armor, yet every innovation carried a profound cost: slower movement, higher metabolic demands, and vulnerability to environmental change. Within the buried remains, limb bones reveal subtle adaptations for weight distribution, showing how armor force changes in gait and posture. Detailed biomechanical reconstructions indicate that even minor shifts in osteoderm weight could alter stride length and limb articulation, making sudden acceleration difficult or impossible. Body mass estimates for some of the largest species approach several hundred kilograms, and the corresponding stress on joints and musculature explains why even skilled ambush tactics were limited in scope. By integrating skeletal structure with armor arrangement, paleontologists can now quantify the delicate balance between protection and mobility that defined these predators' lives. The layered plates of ancient predators reveal the complexity of dermal armor, interlocking structures designed for protection yet hindering agility, often spanning the entire dorsum and extending to tails tipped with spikes or clubs. Osteoderm morphology varied between species, with ridges, grooves, and overlapping segments providing insight into the mechanics of defense, but simultaneously restricting flexibility and stride length. Bone density studies indicate that some of these plates were partially fused to underlying skeletal structures, reinforcing the body at the expense of rapid locomotion or maneuverability. Even the most subtle compromise in limb articulation could dictate life or death in an ecosystem of shifting water levels, dense vegetation, and opportunistic predators. Muscle attachment sites along the vertebrae and limbs indicate a delicate balance between stability and mobility, a compromise often fatal under environmental pressure, where sudden flooding or the need to pursue agile prey could expose critical weaknesses. In some taxa, the sprawling limb posture, combined with heavy dorsal plating, made sudden acceleration impossible, limiting the ability to chase or ambush effectively beyond short distances. Yet the very same adaptations offered resilience against other predators, suggesting a calculated evolutionary gamble, protection from attack in exchange for forfeiting speed and endurance. Biomechanical reconstructions demonstrate that while armored predators could withstand bites that would have crushed less protected contemporaries, they remained supremely vulnerable to changes in habitat or prey behavior, illustrating the razor-thin margin for survival. Paleobotanical evidence suggests dense forests and wetlands created both opportunities and constraints for armored hunters, shaping their predatory strategies in ways that left subtle traces in the fossil record. Floodplain vegetation and mangrove-like wetlands provided cover for ambush, yet these environments were also riddled with obstacles: water channels, fallen logs, and seasonal pools that could trap unwary predators. Sediment analysis indicates that these microhabitats fluctuated seasonally, forcing predators to adapt their hunting techniques continuously. Armor-heavy species, while formidable in open or stable terrain, face disproportionately high risks when navigating such variable environments, underscoring the evolutionary cost of specialization. Subtle wear patterns on armor plates suggest repeated interactions with both prey and environmental obstacles, leaving an indelible mark on survival strategies. Microscopic analysis reveals scratches from vegetation, abrasion from substrate, and even the occasional bite mark from conspecifics or competitors. These microscopic scars, preserved over millions of years, tell a story of constant trial and error, highlighting how defensive structures could serve as both shield and constraint. The armor that protected them could also betray them, forcing evolutionary compromise between durability, flexibility, and ecological function. Trace fossils hint at ambush tactics, with predator depressions and prey disturbances, recording fleeting moments of lethal encounters, ephemeral signatures of success and failure. The spacing and depth of tracks suggest stalking behaviors, where armored predators relied on stealth and surprise rather than sustained pursuit. Fossilized prey remains show patterns of puncture wounds and defensive injuries consistent with encounters involving heavy armor, revealing that these predators were effective within limited parameters. Yet every ambush, every calculated movement, was constrained by the mechanical and metabolic burdens of their defensive structures. Comparisons with modern analogues, such as armadillos and crocodilians, underscore the limitations of extreme body reinforcement in dynamic ecosystems. While these extant species provide a glimpse into how armor can coexist with mobility, they also highlight critical differences. Contemporary armored animals generally occupy specialized ecological niches and rarely attempt apex predation on large, agile prey. The armored ambush predators of the past, by contrast, pushed these limits further, straddling the line between predator and armored fortress, and ultimately revealing how evolutionary experimentation with extreme protection could become a liability. Geochemical analyses of sedimentary layers reveal periodic flooding and drought cycles, environmental challenges that disproportionately affected slow, heavily armored species. Rising waters could strand or drown unwieldy predators, while arid periods demanded mobility and efficiency that their protective designs did not allow. Stable habitats were fleeting in deep time, and as landscapes shifted, selective pressure increasingly favored predators that could balance protection with agility, those that relied on speed, stealth, and ephemeral adaptations rather than brute force reinforcement. Armor, impressive as it was, proved ill-suited to the long-term demands of a changing world. The fossil record hints at seasonal congregation sites where armored predators competed for territory, mating opportunities, and food resources. Sedimentological evidence from multiple floodplain deposits suggests repeated use of shallow pools and mudflats, where heavy armor could limit both mobility and access. Competition among armored species, as well as with faster or more versatile predators, may have accelerated selective pressures that eventually eliminated lineages too specialized to adapt. These dynamics provide a nuanced glimpse into how ecological interactions, not just anatomy, dictated survival or extinction. Even the most formidable predators, for all their defensive adaptations, could not survive shifts in climate, competition, or habitat, illustrating the fragility of over-specialization. Evolutionary history records their spectacular rise and quiet disappearance, a cautionary tale of ambition constrained by environment and mechanics. From their dominance in microhabitats to their vulnerability when conditions changed, these armored titans embody the principle that no design, however impressive, is immune to failure. As these heavily armored lineages faded, the stage was set for predators that would favor speed, cunning, and ephemeral adaptations, continuing life's audacious experimentation in ever more inventive and often transient forms. The short-lived ocean giants. Under shimmering sunlight, massive bodies glided over seafloor plains, casting shadows that rivaled reefs in scale. These transient giants, ranging from enormous placodonts to colossal bony fish and early marine reptiles, emerged in shallow, nutrient-rich seas, exploiting abundant prey with an evolutionary audacity that few lineages could sustain. Their sheer size allowed them to dominate locally, creating ecological monopolies where smaller predators dared not enter. Yet this dominance came tethered to profound biological constraints. Every pulse of muscle and sweep of fin required extraordinary metabolic investment, revealing that success in scale was inseparable from vulnerability. Bone histology reveals astonishing growth rates, with some species adding centimeters of length per month during peak developmental phases. Cross-sections of rib and limb bones show tightly packed growth rings, indicating rapid juvenile expansion that slowed only as individuals approached maximum size. Such accelerated growth enabled them to exploit ephemeral prey swarms, but left them metabolically stressed, dependent on steady, plentiful food supplies. The physical reality of gigantism, with skeletons under immense load and musculature burdened by mass, meant that even minor environmental fluctuations could compromise survival, setting a narrow margin for endurance in these ocean titans. Internal skeletal stress analyses reveal how massive body weight constrained movement and longevity, creating an invisible ticking clock for these giants. Vertebral loading calculations and limb joint reconstructions indicate that repeated swimming and diving placed enormous strain on bones, likely contributing to early mortality in fully grown adults. Fossil evidence of healed fractures and joint degeneration suggests that many individuals live precarious lives, balancing the benefits of size with the biomechanical cost of maintaining enormous frames in shallow, turbulent waters. Evolution had pushed these lineages to the edge of physiological possibility, and the consequences were written in every vertebra. Isotopic analysis of fossilized teeth and bones illuminates the diets and migratory patterns of these giants, revealing a reliance on dense schools of fish, shelled invertebrates, and soft-bodied cephalopods. Variations in oxygen isotopes indicate seasonal movements between warmer and cooler shallow waters, while carbon ratios reflect shifts in prey composition throughout the year. This intimate connection between size and resource availability explains why localized ecological perturbations could have disproportionately catastrophic consequences, erasing entire populations in a geological heartbeat. The presence of ocean giants transformed the very structure of shallow sea ecosystems, reshaping prey populations and community dynamics. Fossil assemblages show dramatic declines in small bivalves, crustaceans, and juvenile fish, coinciding with peaks in giant predator abundance. Overgrazing of benthic prey may have caused cascading effects, creating resource bottlenecks that amplified the risks associated with gigantism. In essence, these predators were both architects and victims of their own ecological dominance, demonstrating the fragile interplay between size, predation, and environmental balance. Sediment cores indicate frequent storm events, tidal fluctuations, and occasional sea level regressions, environmental pressures that challenged even the most massive predators. Fossil beds often reveal abrupt mass mortality layers, where hundreds of oversized individuals appear entombed simultaneously, suggesting episodic die-offs tied to environmental instability rather than predation. The combination of ecological abundance and instability created a paradox. Shallow seas offered opportunity and danger in equal measure, with gigantism providing a temporary solution that evolution could not sustain over the long term. Parallels with modern marine megafauna reveal just how fragile to rapid gigantism can be. Contemporary whales and large sharks survive because they inhabit vast, connected oceans, allowing them to disperse, migrate, and buffer against localized resource fluctuations. In contrast, shallow sea giants were geographically restricted, constrained by coastal topography, temperature gradients, and prey density, revealing the delicate balance between scale and survivability. Physiological limits, oxygen delivery, thermoregulation, skeletal integrity, further restricted lifespan, and reproductive output, making extinction a likely outcome once environmental thresholds were crossed. Predator-prey dynamics in these shallow seas reveal intense competition, with multiple lineages converging on similar ecological niches. Fossil evidence shows overlapping ranges of large fish, placodonts, and marine reptiles, all vying for the same food sources. Bite marks, healed injuries, and occasional cannibalism indicate not only predation pressure, but also intraspecific competition, where dominance could be temporary and survival tenuous. Even the largest individuals, capable of subduing most prey, remain susceptible to ecological bottlenecks, illustrating that gigantism alone could not secure long-term evolutionary success. Fossil assemblages suggest episodic blooms and mass die-offs, leaving only fleeting traces of these once massive marine lineages. Rapid deposition layers preserve snapshots of thriving populations abruptly halted, creating a cinematic record of abundance and collapse. These ephemeral signals emphasize the transient nature of evolutionary experimentation at extreme scales, highlighting how life repeatedly tests boundaries with both triumph and failure. The visual of an entire shallow sea ecosystem dominated by creatures several meters long, vanishing in a geological instant, conveys the fragility of ambition writ large. As body size reached its apex, even minor perturbations in sea level, temperature, or prey availability could trigger catastrophic collapse. Paleoceanographic studies show that storm-driven sedimentation and periodic hypoxic events could overwhelm these giants' physiological capacities. Their enormous energy requirements meant that a single environmental disruption could ripple through populations, turning ecological advantage into lethal liability. In this way, gigantism became both a ticket to dominance and a harbinger of extinction, a fleeting evolutionary experiment written in bone and sediment. The impermanence of these giants contrasts sharply with later marine strategies, favoring agility, endurance, and ecological flexibility over sheer mass. Evolutionary history reveals a pivot towards smaller, specialized predators and filter feeders that could thrive in variable conditions, succeeding where the oversized forms failed. In tracing the rise and fall of these giants, we witness the cost of audacity in evolution. Ambition scaled to extremes often carries the seeds of impermanence, shaping the ocean's future with lessons encoded in their brief, spectacular reign. In their extinction, we witness evolution's ceaseless experimentation, setting the stage for the next wave of marine innovation, where diminutive, agile, and highly adaptable species would claim niches that giants could not hold. From the shallow seas once ruled by titanic predators, the story now shifts to miniature wonders of the deep that never endured, yet whose fleeting presence reveals the same relentless drive to test the limits of form, function, and survival. The miniature titans. Among corals and tidal rocks, tiny bodies concealed remarkable power, each muscle fiber engineered for efficiency and speed. These miniature vertebrates, no larger than a human hand, wielded strength disproportionate to their size, dominating crevices, tide pools, and intricate reef networks that larger predators could not exploit. Their fleeting reign in these microhabitats illustrates a curious reversal in evolutionary strategy. Here, success depended not on massive scale, but on precision, agility, and force, amplified by miniaturization. Every movement, leaping across rocks, twisting into burrows, striking at unsuspecting prey, was a testament to the ingenuity of form under constraint. Biomechanical reconstructions revealed jaw strength, limb leverage, and body proportions that allowed these diminutive animals to subdue prey far larger than themselves. Fossilized cranial elements indicate reinforced skulls and specialized dentition capable of cracking exoskeletons or tearing soft-bodied organisms with efficiency. Limb bones demonstrate high muscle attachment ratios, suggesting explosive force in jumps and grapples. These adaptations enabled ecological dominance in microhabitats where size alone offered little advantage, turning small bodies into remarkably effective predators. Buried in ancient sediments, trace fossils and burrow impressions reveal interactions, territoriality, and predatory behaviors rarely preserved in larger species. Scrapes on rock surfaces, claw marks on shells, and impressions of fleeting movements reveal a vibrant tapestry of competition, feeding strategies, and sheltering techniques. These subtle traces, ephemeral though they may be, provide a window into a vanished world where tiny vertebrates orchestrated complex behaviors with precision, shaping microecosystems long before the first large-scale marine or terrestrial predators claimed dominion. By examining modern analogues like anoles, small frogs, and diminutive lizards, we gain insight into the ecological logic of extreme strength relative to size. Observations of leverage, bite force, and locomotor agility in these contemporary species help reconstruct how miniature titans manipulated their environment, hunted, and defended territories. The scaling laws governing muscle mass versus body size reveal that evolutionary pressure can generate astonishing force in small packages, a principle that permitted these micropredators to briefly outcompete organisms many times their own mass. Microhabitat complexity created both opportunities and constraints, forcing unprecedented adaptations in locomotion, feeding, and sensory perception. Reef crevices, tidal pool labyrinths, and densely vegetated riverbanks offered shelter and prey, but demanded nimble maneuvering and precise spatial awareness. Fossil evidence of specialized limb articulation and claw curvature shows how these animals negotiated uneven substrates and pursued elusive prey, demonstrating that micro-scale ecological niches can drive morphological ingenuity as extreme as that seen in megafauna, albeit on a drastically different scale. Heightened sensory systems, keen vision, tactile sensitivity, and rapid neural responses amplified the hunting efficiency of these tiny vertebrates. Fossilized cranial and orbital features suggest large eyes relative to skull size, enabling precise tracking of moving prey in low-light conditions. Vibrissae-like structures and lateral line analogues likely enhanced tactile feedback, while delicate inner ear adaptations allowed swift reactions to shifts in water or substrate. Such sensory innovations compensated for their small size, transforming diminutive predators into apex microhabitat hunters, despite their fleeting presence in the fossil record. Insights from isotopic and chemical analyses of preserved remains indicate highly specialized diets, often focusing on protein-rich invertebrates, planktonic larvae, or juvenile fish. Carbon and nitrogen ratios suggest rapid metabolism and high energy requirements, revealing why these lineages could thrive only in localized, resource-abundant pockets. Such specialization allowed temporary dominance, but also rendered them vulnerable to shifts in prey availability or habitat structure. Their fleeting success underscores a paradox. Extreme adaptation provides an immediate competitive edge, yet limits long-term survivability in an ever-changing environment. Reproductive adaptations reveal how miniature titans maximized survival despite their ephemeral dominance. Small clutch sizes and rapid embryonic development allowed for quick population surges, while eggs deposited in crevices or sheltered microhabitats were shielded from the largest predators. Juveniles reached functional maturity swiftly, enabling them to contribute to ecosystem dynamics almost immediately. These life history strategies reflect an evolutionary gamble. Short-term reproductive efficiency traded for long-term persistence, a choice dictated by the narrow windows of ecological opportunity available to miniature specialists. Population density estimates suggest rapid colonization and intense competition, creating dynamic, high-stakes micro-ecosystems. Fossil assemblages in concentrated reef deposits show clusters of coexisting miniature titans, indicating that their success was not solitary but communal, with overlapping territories and frequent interaction. These dense populations, while temporarily stable, amplified the consequences of environmental disruption. Minor tidal fluctuations, storms, or substrate shifts could cascade through these tightly packed communities, triggering local extinctions with rapidity unmatched by larger, more resilient species. Morphological experiments in limb articulation, claw curvature, and cranial mechanics demonstrate a short-lived but highly optimized evolutionary strategy. Fossil comparisons reveal rapid shifts in body proportions over successive generations, suggesting natural selection favored those capable of greater force output and agility in confined spaces. Each anatomical innovation was an experiment in miniaturized dominance, a fleeting but telling illustration of evolution's willingness to explore extreme form, even when long-term survival remained precarious. Environmental volatility, tidal fluctuations, storms, and substrate shifts expose the fragility of even the most successful miniature predators. Unlike the sprawling shallow seas, microhabitats offered limited buffering against disturbance. Temperature swings, sudden substrate erosion, and competition from other microfauna created an environment where survival depended on adaptability as much as strength. The story of these miniature titans demonstrates that evolutionary success is as much about environmental context as anatomical prowess, and that fleeting dominance leaves subtle but discernible imprints on the fossil and ecological record. As these tiny titans disappeared, evolution pivoted once more, experimenting with extreme sensory and neural specializations that stretched the boundaries of perception. Their extinction, though silent and largely invisible in the geological record, illustrates the recurring principle that scale, whether immense or minuscule, carries both opportunity and risk. From these diminutive powerhouses, life's narrative shifted toward creatures whose audacity would be measured not in size or strength but in perception, revealing the subtle yet profound ways innovation can shape ecological dynamics. The blind visionaries. Invisible to most observers, these predators ruled realms measured in signals rather than sight. In prehistoric rivers, swamps, and shallow seas, certain lineages evolved sensory adaptations that extended beyond conventional perception, including electroreception, infrared detection, and vibration sensing. These abilities allowed them to detect prey, rivals, and environmental cues in conditions that would confound ordinary vision or touch. Their ecological influence was profound, shaping prey behavior, territory selection, and microhabitat use without leaving a single bone or tooth behind. Evolution favored these innovations for their precision, yet this mastery came at the cost of versatility, rendering their dominance fragile and fleeting. Currents in water or subtle heat gradients became a canvas upon which they hunted with precision. Fossil evidence, such as cranial impressions, nerve canals, and sensory pits, suggests that these predators could sense minute electrical fields generated by muscle contractions or detect temperature differences as slight as a fraction of a degree. Such capabilities allowed nocturnal hunting and foraging in turbid waters, giving them an advantage over both competitors and prey. By tracing these invisible signals, they could locate and capture prey that was otherwise concealed, demonstrating the remarkable efficiency of sensory specialization in marginal habitats. Tiny sensors embedded in skulls and fins captured information no other species could detect. Electroreceptive organs were often paired with lateral line systems, providing a three-dimensional map of movement in the surrounding environment. Infrared-sensitive tissues, inferred from fossil sinus structures, enabled predators to perceive heat gradients, effectively seeing prey without the aid of light. The integration of multiple sensory modalities created a predator capable of coordinating rapid strikes, avoiding obstacles, and monitoring rivals simultaneously. In this way, sensory architecture became a toolkit for survival, entirely invisible to contemporaneous observers. Neural pathways expanded to interpret complex environmental data at speeds unmatched by competitors. Enlarged cranial cavities indicate that these lineages possessed expanded processing centers capable of integrating multisensory input almost instantaneously. Reaction times may have approached those seen in modern predatory fish and reptiles, allowing instantaneous decisions during pursuit or ambush. Such neural sophistication required high metabolic investment, linking sensory precision to energetic cost. These trade-offs highlight evolution's delicate balance between extraordinary capability and ecological vulnerability, demonstrating that specialization is rarely without risk. Sudden storms, shifts in tides, and temperature fluctuations exposed the fragility of their finely tuned systems. Even minor environmental disruptions, flood pulses, salinity shifts, or habitat fragmentation could compromise their hunting efficiency. Specialized prey behaviors, such as burrow retreat or nocturnal activity, compounded these challenges, rendering predators incapable of adaptation on the timescales necessary for survival. The very attributes that provided dominance under stable conditions became liabilities when the environment shifted, emphasizing the precariousness of extreme sensory reliance. Fossil impressions of cranial cavities and nerve canals provide rare glimpses into their extraordinary sensory architecture. Though direct preservation is uncommon, these traces allow paleontologists to reconstruct organ placement and potential function. Cranial ridges, foramina, and inner ear morphology suggest intricate networks for electrical and thermal detection, as well as for processing vibrational cues. Such anatomical evidence, though subtle, confirms that evolution experimented extensively in sensory design, producing lineages that thrived in niches invisible to most other species. Prey species modified their behaviors, hiding, migrating, or timing activity to avoid invisible threats. Trace fossils indicate shifts in burrow depth, nocturnal foraging patterns, and migration routes, suggesting adaptive responses to unseen predation pressure. These behavioral changes had cascading ecological effects, altering reproductive timing, population density, and microhabitat use. Even in the absence of fossilized predators, the imprint of their sensory mastery is detectable through careful interpretation of environmental and ecological evidence, revealing a hidden layer of evolutionary influence. Specialization provided mastery over certain niches, but left these lineages unable to adapt to change. Reliance on particular sensory modalities constrained their flexibility, leaving predators ill-equipped to exploit alternative prey or habitats when conditions shifted. Competition from more generalized species further reduced survival prospects, as predators with broader tolerances could withstand environmental perturbations. Evolution, in this context, appears both creative and ruthless, producing brilliance that could vanish within a single ecological cycle. Modern analogues, from electric fish to infrared-sensitive reptiles, offer insight into the evolutionary logic behind these adaptations. Electric rays, catfish, and pit vipers illustrate how specialized sensory systems can provide acute environmental awareness and hunting efficiency. Observing their behavior clarifies the trade-offs these extinct lineages faced. Extreme specialization yielded temporary dominance, but limited resilience to rapid change. By comparing morphology, neural anatomy, and behavioral ecology, scientists can infer the operational principles of these blind visionaries and the selective pressures that ultimately doomed them. Their dominance was ephemeral, leaving effects only in ecological patterns and subtle environmental imprints. Microhabitat use, prey behavior, and local biodiversity were reshaped by the presence of predators whose bodies left almost no trace. Sedimentary layers, feeding traces, and burrow arrangements provide evidence that sensory innovation could ripple through ecosystems, impacting organisms far removed from direct predation. The story of these lineages illustrates that evolutionary experimentation leaves signatures in ecology and behavior, even when anatomical records are largely absent. Extinction followed quietly, without leaving bones or teeth, demonstrating the cost of extreme specialization. These predators vanished as environmental variability increased, prey evolved, or competition intensified, underscoring the vulnerability inherent in extreme adaptations. Their disappearance, though invisible in the fossil record, reminds us that evolutionary success is transient and context-dependent. Even the most extraordinary abilities cannot guarantee survival when the ecological foundation shifts beneath them. Signals once invisible to the human eye disappeared as the lineages themselves vanished, leaving no physical record but a lasting ecological echo. Life's experimentation had reached another boundary, proving both the potential and the limits of sensory mastery. The ephemeral triumphs of these predators highlight the interplay between form, function, and environmental stability, providing a reflective lens on the audacity of evolution's experiments. From these blind visionaries, evolution turned again toward experiments in skeletal and structural innovation. The extinction of these sensory specialists created ecological space and highlighted the risks of hyper-specialization, guiding subsequent lineages toward audacious trials in body form and mechanical engineering. As life sought new ways to manipulate the environment, the narrative shifted from perception to architecture, laying the foundation for structural experimentation that would leave lasting fossilized records. The skeletal labyrinths. Emerging from the shadow of sensory mastery, life redirected its ambitions toward the architecture of bones themselves. Where perception had once dictated success, now structure became the arena of experimentation, as creatures pushed vertebrate anatomy to its mechanical and metabolic limits. Elaborate ridges, towering spines, and dual skeletal frameworks appeared, each a bold evolutionary solution to predation, display, or locomotor demands. These lineages tested not only the possibilities of form, but the boundaries of energy, expenditure, survival, and flexibility, with each generation amplifying both ingenuity and vulnerability. The environment provided opportunity, but also relentless scrutiny, as failure often arrived swiftly and without warning. Vertebrate skeletons became canvases for experiments in height, leverage, and interlocking frameworks. Fossil records, though incomplete, reveal vertebrae modified into intricate lattices, sometimes spanning several centimeters beyond the norm for their body size. Limb bones, elongated and reinforced, suggest attempts at greater support for novel postures or rapid strikes, while ribs and neural spines frequently developed additional projections, presumably for muscle attachment or defensive coverage. These modifications indicate a conscious design in evolutionary terms, where structural extremes were favored by selective pressures but had hidden costs that only manifested under stress. Fossilized spines and ridges hint at designs intended for both defense and display, their function visible only in careful reconstruction. Some specimens show evidence of thickened cortical bone at high stress points, while other regions remain surprisingly delicate, indicating a balancing act between strength and flexibility. Patterns of ornamentation, such as lateral ridges or dorsal keels, may have served to intimidate rivals or attract mates, reflecting a dual function that combines survival utility with evolutionary signaling. The interaction between mechanical necessity and social or ecological signaling underscores the layered complexity of these experiments. Dual skeletal frameworks suggest a vision of structural redundancy that could theoretically enhance survival, yet demanded immense energy. In some fish, amphibians, and early reptiles, paired structural elements ran parallel along the axial skeleton, distributing mechanical load and potentially providing stability against torsional forces. Maintaining such redundant structures required additional tissue and musculature, substantially increasing caloric requirements and slowing growth rates. While redundancy offered resilience against certain injuries or mechanical failures, it also magnified the metabolic cost of survival, revealing a delicate trade-off between durability and efficiency. Muscle attachments and joint articulations reveal the limits imposed by exaggerated anatomy, where even slight miscalculations could prove fatal. Fossils indicate regions where elongated neural spines likely impeded limb movement or restricted lateral flexibility, while exaggerated vertebral processes could create points of stress, concentration prone to fracture. These designs highlight the thin line between innovation and overreach. Structural extremes might confer advantage in a particular task, but compromise overall mobility or agility. Evolution, in this context, emerges as a daring engineer, experimenting with potential forms while flirting with catastrophic failure. Comparisons with modern analogues, such as armor-plated fish, horned reptiles, and spined amphibians, illuminate the evolutionary logic and trade-offs behind these designs. These living species demonstrate how selective pressures can favor pronounced skeletal projections for protection, sexual signaling, or predatory efficiency, but at a cost to energy expenditure, flexibility, or reproductive output. By examining these parallels, paleobiologists can infer not only function but also vulnerability, giving life to extinct skeletal labyrinths that would otherwise be interpretable only as inert structures in stone. Rapid environmental shifts, including climate variation, predator-prey dynamics, and habitat instability, exposed the brittleness inherent in extreme skeletal forms. In shallow seas or floodplain environments, a sudden increase in water velocity or sediment load could generate stresses exceeding the tolerances of intricate vertebral frameworks. Similarly, shifts in prey, abundance, or competition might render energy-intensive skeletal designs disadvantageous, favoring smaller, more agile competitors. These pressures illustrate why even audacious structural experimentation was often ephemeral, producing forms as fleeting as they were striking. Biomechanical modeling shows that stress concentrations along ridges or spines likely caused catastrophic failures under normal activity. Computer simulations of load distribution, informed by fossil morphology, indicate that many extreme projections amplified forces at attachment points, creating regions prone to fracture or deformation. This evidence underscores the interplay between ambition and limitation. Evolution could explore forms far beyond modern analogues, but physical laws imposed boundaries that could not be circumvented. Failures of skeletal labyrinths were not always dramatic, but even small mechanical inefficiencies could accumulate, hastening extinction. The fossil record preserves glimpses of this ingenuity in fragmented vertebrae, disarticulated spines, and rare complete specimens. Sites containing articulated skeletons reveal complex interconnections between ribs, spines, and limb supports, suggesting evolutionary experimentation with novel body plans. Even partial remains provide insight into the diversity of skeletal strategies, demonstrating how multiple lineages independently explored similar extremes. These ephemeral records emphasize that while audacious experimentation leaves marks in stone, only the most fortunate or the most rapidly fossilized survive long enough to inform modern study. Despite their imposing structures, many lineages vanished quietly, leaving only ephemeral imprints in sedimentary strata and comparative morphology. Fossil gaps hint at sudden collapses, likely triggered by a combination of metabolic stress, mechanical failure, and environmental shifts. Their disappearance underscores a recurring evolutionary theme. Audacious structural experimentation can create brilliant but short-lived designs, where innovation is tightly coupled to fragility. The skeletal labyrinths, in their rise and fall, illuminate the limits of form when ambition exceeds adaptability. Their extinction underscores the recurring theme. Audacious experimentation can produce brilliance, yet remain exquisitely fragile. As predators, herbivores and omnivores alike attempted to leverage skeletal extremes for defense, display, or locomotion. Each adaptation carried unseen costs. Life repeatedly tests boundaries, demonstrating that survival relies not only on creativity, but also on the interplay between energy, mechanics, and environmental stability. These skeletal experiments, though largely vanished, leave enduring lessons about the fine line separating innovation from overreach. Within skeletal labyrinths, evolution shifted focus toward reproductive gambles, testing numbers, timing, and phenotypic extremes to shape populations on short ecological timescales. The failures of these audacious structural experiments highlighted both the possibilities and limits of physical form, encouraging subsequent lineages to explore success through other avenues. Life's narrative continued, turning toward ephemeral experiments in reproduction, where quantity, timing, and genetic strategy offered new ways to influence survival, persistence, and ecological impact, even when individual forms remained transient. The reproductive gambits. In the silent ebb and flow of prehistoric waters, some species pursued reproduction with unprecedented intensity, their strategies spanning the spectrum from mass spawning to clutch gigantism, pushing both individuals and ecosystems to extremes. Entire populations could synchronize reproductive events, releasing countless eggs or sperm into the environment within hours or days, a fleeting spectacle of abundance and risk. These gambits were more than attempts at survival, they were evolutionary experiments, testing the power of numbers, timing, and phenotypic plasticity against the merciless pressures of ecology. Yet, for all their audacity, the very scale of these efforts often carried seeds of failure, as resource limits, predation, and environmental fluctuation conspired to destabilize the population. Population booms, sometimes catastrophic, highlighted the precarious balance between fecundity and survival. When too many offspring were produced simultaneously, ecosystems could not sustain the resulting demand for nutrients, shelter, and prey. Predatory species would sometimes feast opportunistically, creating feedback loops that wiped out entire cohorts. Conversely, if reproductive output was too conservative, populations failed to persist, leaving gaps that competitors could exploit. In these extremes, evolution revealed its merciless logic. Neither exuberance nor restraint guaranteed long-term success. Evolutionary calculations were tested as clutch sizes expanded far beyond sustainable limits. Some species produced egg batches so large that individual energy reserves were stretched to the breaking point, leaving adults weakened or unable to survive subsequent reproductive cycles. The energetic toll of producing, guarding, or dispersing vast numbers of offspring created invisible constraints on survival, demonstrating how the ambition of reproduction could paradoxically limit a lineage's persistence. Ecological data from analogous modern systems, combined with sedimentary evidence of sudden population collapse, suggest these strategies were both brilliant and inherently fragile. Simultaneous sexual transformations offered novel opportunities but also hidden vulnerabilities. In some species, individuals could change sex in response to population ratios or environmental cues, theoretically maximizing reproductive output and ensuring genetic diversity. However, Timing had to be perfect. Too many individuals transforming simultaneously could leave temporary gaps in population viability, while too few could fail to capitalize on reproductive potential. These fleeting advantages often came at immense physiological cost, and the line between successful adaptation and systemic collapse was razor thin. Environmental stochasticity exposed the limits of timing and coordination in these reproductive gambits. Droughts, temperature shifts, or sudden changes in water chemistry could decimate an entire cohort before a single offspring reached maturity. Even minor fluctuations could cascade through populations, compounding the consequences of hyper-specialized reproductive behaviors. The fragility of these strategies underscored a recurrent theme in evolutionary experimentation. Audacious designs often fail spectacularly when environmental variability exceeds the bounds for which they were optimized. The short-lived success of mass-spawning events rippled through ecosystems, influencing predator-prey dynamics and reshaping microhabitats. Predators adapted to the sudden glut of food, sometimes undergoing their own population surges, while competitors for nesting or feeding grounds found temporary opportunities. Such cascading effects demonstrate that even ephemeral reproductive bursts could leave a profound imprint on ecological structure, guiding future evolutionary pressures in subtle but enduring ways. Genetic variation provided a brief buffer, yet even this could not prevent systemic collapse. Populations with greater genetic diversity could withstand some environmental shocks, producing survivors capable of maintaining the lineage for a few more generations. However, these safeguards were often insufficient against simultaneous ecological or physiological stresses. The paradox of reproductive gambits was that they maximized immediate potential while heightening vulnerability to the unpredictable forces of the natural world. Ecological feedback loops emerged, shaping the trajectory of future lineages through subtle pressures. Areas of concentrated spawning or reproductive specialization could alter nutrient cycles, sediment composition, or microclimate, leaving a legacy invisible to traditional paleontology. In this way, the successes and failures of reproductive experiments echoed beyond the lifespans of individuals, molding ecological landscapes in ways that would influence the next wave of evolutionary trials. Fossil traces of these strategies were often absent, leaving only indirect evidence in population structures and sedimentary patterns. Layers of fine sediment, enriched with isotopes or organic matter, hint at mass reproductive events, while abrupt shifts in species abundance signal the collapse of audacious gambits. Even without bones or shells to preserve, the footprints of these strategies remain discernible to those who read the subtle markers left behind in rocks and strata, a silent testimony to the ingenuity and risk inherent in evolution's experiments. Behavioral innovations arose in response to failure, demonstrating the adaptability of reproductive systems. Some species adjusted timing, dispersal, or parental investment in reaction to repeated environmental stresses, exploring new strategies within the same ecological window. While these adjustments were often temporary or incomplete, they reflect the iterative nature of life's experimentation. Failures are rarely final, and the pressure to innovate persists across generations, driving evolution toward new and sometimes unexpected solutions. These transient experiments emphasize the interplay between scale, timing, and environmental context. Whether producing millions of tiny eggs or orchestrating simultaneous sex changes across a population, the strategies reveal a sophisticated understanding encoded in biology. Survival is not merely about individual form, but about synchronization, numbers, and responsiveness to an ever-changing world. Each reproductive gambit, though short-lived, demonstrated how life tests extremes, pushing both species and ecosystems to the edge of stability. Even in extinction, reproductive audacity left invisible fingerprints that would influence subsequent evolutionary strategies. The failures of mass spawning, clutch gigantism, and coordinated sex transformations shaped selective pressures on future lineages, favoring flexibility, resilience, and adaptability over sheer numerical ambition. These fleeting experiments, largely invisible in the fossil record, underscore a recurring principle in evolution. Audacious strategies may vanish, but their ecological and evolutionary consequences endure, subtly shaping the trajectories of life that follow. The chemical assassins. Lurking in the overlooked corners of ancient ecosystems, chemical ingenuity shaped the fates of both predator and prey, invisible yet potent forces sculpting survival and competition. Some lineages evolved secretory organs, capable of producing toxins so powerful that a single strike or contact could immobilize or kill prey many times their size. These biochemical weapons were the culmination of evolutionary experimentation, where precision, timing, and dosage became as vital as physical strength or speed. Yet, as with all audacious designs, potency carried risk. Reliance on a narrow prey base or environmental stability rendered even the most effective chemicals fragile instruments of survival. Venom glands and secretory organs evolved with astonishing precision, targeting specific physiological vulnerabilities in prey species. Molecular adaptations allowed toxins to interfere with nervous systems, coagulation, or muscular function in ways that maximized efficiency while minimizing energy expenditure. In some lineages, multiple toxin variants evolved simultaneously, creating a biochemical arsenal capable of overcoming a range of prey defenses. These innovations illustrate evolution's capacity for microscopic ingenuity, producing weapons invisible to the naked eye, yet devastating in their effects. The potency of these toxins rivaled anything seen in modern fauna, yet their effectiveness depended on a fragile ecological balance. Shifts in prey populations, changes in habitat structure, or the arrival of competing predators could instantly render a chemical strategy ineffective. Unlike structural adaptations that could persist through changing conditions, biochemical specialization demanded a precise alignment of factors, a precarious equation in a dynamic world. This delicate dependence demonstrates that evolutionary success is rarely permanent and often hinges on circumstances beyond an organism's control. Overspecialization on particular prey created perilous vulnerabilities when food sources shifted or vanished. Some predators developed toxins targeting a single clade of invertebrates or small vertebrates, leaving them incapable of exploiting alternative resources. In periods of scarcity, entire populations could collapse, their sophisticated chemical armament rendered useless. This pattern echoes across time, illustrating a fundamental lesson. Extremity in evolutionary innovation carries intrinsic risk, and even the most powerful adaptations cannot guarantee survival against environmental uncertainty. Environmental sensitivity further constrains survival, as temperature, humidity, and pH levels could alter toxin, stability, or delivery. Chemical reactions that functioned optimally in one microhabitat might fail in another, limiting the geographical or ecological range of specialized predators. Seasonal fluctuations or climatic events could temporarily neutralize a predator's effectiveness, creating windows of opportunity for prey species to recover. In this way, biochemical power became a double-edged sword, capable of both dominance and vulnerability within the same ecosystem. Even the briefest miscalculation in dosage or timing could render a chemical arsenal useless, emphasizing the precision required for success. A venom strike delivered too late or too early, or a secretory compound misproduced under stress, could result in failed hunts and wasted energy. Over generations, these small errors could amplify, leading to population decline and eventual extinction. Evolution's experiments, while brilliant in design, were unforgiving of missteps, particularly in lineages that concentrated all adaptive effort on chemical predation. Predatory competition forced iterative experimentation, producing an array of chemical strategies, some more ephemeral than others. Lineages alternated between extreme specialization and cautious generalism, testing the limits of both approaches. Certain species combined venom potency with behavioral sophistication, using ambush, mimicry, or cooperative hunting to enhance the efficacy of their chemical tools. These experiments, though rarely preserved in the fossil record, demonstrate evolution's layered approach to problem solving. Innovation could be both molecular and ecological, simultaneous and interdependent. Indirectly, the legacy of these biochemical experiments is preserved in isotopic anomalies and sedimentary traces. Concentrations of organic compounds, unusual mineral associations, or chemical signatures preserved in rock layers hint at the presence of toxic secretions in ancient ecosystems. Even without fossilized skeletons or soft tissue, paleontologists can infer the ecological impact of chemical predators by examining prey population collapses, shifts in sedimentary nutrient cycling, and cascading effects on associated fauna. These subtle traces provide a window into evolutionary strategies that were otherwise invisible to history. Some lineages combined chemical and behavioral tactics, illustrating the multidimensional nature of evolutionary problem solving. Ambush predators, for example, could deliver toxins precisely where needed, while social or cooperative behaviors allowed the chemical advantage to be amplified across a group. In each case, the interplay of morphology, behavior, and biochemistry revealed the sophistication of these ephemeral experiments. They were not merely accidents of adaptation, but deliberate evolutionary gambits, testing new ways to dominate ecological niches with minimal physical confrontation. The collapse of potent chemical specialists opened ecological niches for more flexible or generalized predators, demonstrating that even failure shapes the future of life. As these highly specialized lineages vanished, opportunities emerged for organisms with broader diets, greater environmental tolerance, and less rigid reliance on chemical mechanisms. The extinction of chemical extremes, like the failure of reproductive or skeletal experiments before them, highlights a recurring evolutionary pattern. Audacity may achieve temporary success, but longevity often favors adaptability over extremity. These ephemeral experiments reveal the invisible architecture of selective pressures and ecological influence. Chemical predators, though often absent from the fossil record, acted as agents of ecological change, influencing prey behavior, competitive dynamics, and resource distribution. Their fleeting presence underscores the subtle, often unseen ways in which evolutionary experimentation leaves traces in the structure and function of ecosystems, even when physical remains vanish entirely. The echoes of extinction carry chemical audacity, leaving subtle marks that instruct on balance, adaptability, and the dangers of over-specialization. Potent secretions, once capable of shaping entire microhabitats, disappeared when environmental shifts or dietary limitations rendered them ineffective. Yet the echoes of these experiments influence the evolutionary trajectories of surviving lineages, favoring strategies that balanced power with flexibility. From the fleeting triumphs of these chemical assassins, life's narrative continued, exploring new avenues of survival where bold innovation could persist only if harmonized with the ever-shifting constraints of the natural world. The fleeting giants of the air, threading through prehistoric air, ambitious wings traced arcs that tested the limits of both biology and physics, carrying creatures that pushed the boundaries of size, structure, and endurance. Insects with wingspans dwarfing modern dragonflies, pterosaurs stretching their membranous appendages over meters of airspace, and early avian lineages experimenting with novel feather arrangements occupied niches where flight became both weapon and survival tool. These aerial experiments were audacious in design, yet precarious in execution, exposing the delicate interplay between energy, anatomy, and environmental demand that governs life aloft. Enormous wingspans, whether in arthropods or vertebrates, demanded extraordinary metabolic support to sustain even brief periods of flight. Oxygen delivery, muscle contraction, speed, and caloric intake had to scale with body size, creating thresholds beyond which endurance collapsed. Fossil reconstructions suggest that certain pterosaurs possessed bone structures hollowed to the extreme, maximizing lift while minimizing weight. Yet even these innovations could not fully overcome the energetic demands imposed by gravity and air resistance. Insects of comparable ambition faced similar constraints, relying on tracheal networks and wing beat frequency to deliver oxygen. But the scaling laws of flight limited their maximum dimensions. Aerodynamic efficiency often faltered under the weight of sheer size, imposing strict boundaries on maneuverability and aerial precision. Larger wings created increased lift, but also introduced drag and torque, reducing control during hunting, evasion, or mating displays. Subtle shifts in wing shape, joint flexibility, or muscle placement could make the difference between graceful flight and catastrophic stalling. Some pterosaurs evolved specialized shoulder joints and elongated pectoral muscles to compensate, while giant insects relied on rapid wing beats and flared thoracic musculature, yet the margin for error remained slim. Environmental fluctuations, from wind patterns to atmospheric density changes, further constrained aerial experiments. Paleoatmospheric studies indicate that oxygen levels, air pressure, and climate oscillations could amplify the metabolic strain on these giant flyers. Storms, seasonal winds, or sudden temperature shifts might prevent sustained flight, limit hunting ranges, or force temporary grounded periods that expose them to predation. Insects and pterosaurs alike required habitats that balanced lift, prey availability, and shelter, revealing that successful flight depended as much on ecosystem stability as anatomical innovation. Prey and predator interactions in these airborne arenas created feedback loops, shaping the evolution of flight strategies. Arboreal and aerial prey responded to the presence of giants by altering flight paths, nesting behavior, or timing of activity, which in turn pressured predators to refine attack angles, wing morphology, or energy expenditure. Fossilized trackways, nest positions, and feeding traces suggest these interactions influence flight efficiency, hunting success, and even population structure. Evolution was testing extremes of aerial capability, yet ecological pressures ensured that only finely tuned adaptations could persist. Fossil evidence hints at these giants through bone structure, muscle attachment, and trace wing impressions, providing glimpses of an era when the sky itself was a proving ground. Impressions in sedimentary rock reveal vein patterns and wing outlines that suggest membranous flexibility and size. Pterosaur limb bones, with expanded distal ends and pneumatic cavities, indicate weight-saving strategies that allowed for brief glides or powered flight. Similarly, oversized insect fossils show reinforced thoracic exoskeletons and wing articulation adapted to support vast surfaces, offering tangible proof of evolution's aerial ambition. Energetic limitations frequently forced mid-air compromises, resulting in failed migrations, reduced hunting success, or population decline. Even the most skilled flyers could exhaust energy reserves during long-distance foraging or the pursuit of agile prey. A single unsuccessful foraging day might deplete reserves beyond recovery, particularly in juvenile individuals or during periods of environmental stress. These constraints demonstrate that aerial gigantism, while visually and ecologically striking, imposed severe survival costs that few lineages could overcome for extended periods. Some lineages attempted compensatory adaptations, such as hollow bones, elongated limbs, or feather arrangements that maximized lift and maneuverability, yet these often proved insufficient. Morphological innovations required precise integration with muscle strength, wing beat frequency, and energy metabolism. Tiny deviations in anatomy or function could disrupt flight dynamics, turning previously successful strategies into fatal liabilities. The balance between innovation and constraint was unforgiving, and many of the most ambitious designs vanished without leaving direct descendants. Rapid climate or vegetation shifts could suddenly render formerly efficient flyers incapable of sustaining populations. Forest density, canopy height, and the distribution of prey species directly influenced flight efficiency. Droughts, flooding, or deforestation could decrease hunting success or limit suitable roosting locations. These environmental perturbations underscore that aerial experimentation was not solely an anatomical challenge, but a race against ecological instability, where success was measured not just in survival, but in sustaining reproductive populations over time. Even transient aerial dominance influenced terrestrial ecosystems by altering prey distributions and predator pressures. Trees and shrubs adapted to the presence of airborne predators, while ground-dwelling animals shifted activity patterns or evolved defensive behaviors. The mere shadow of giant wings passing overhead could trigger evolutionary responses across multiple trophic levels, demonstrating that failure or ephemeral success in the sky left ripples that shaped both flora and fauna below. The rise and fall of these giants exemplifies the tension between evolutionary ambition and environmental constraints. Gigantic wings, extreme flight maneuvers, and novel aerodynamic adaptations achieved temporary ecological significance, yet faltered under the weight of energy demand, habitat specificity, and atmospheric variability. Their extinction illustrates a recurring theme in life's experimentation. Audacity can achieve remarkable feats, but permanence favors those who harmonize ambition with ecological feasibility. Their fleeting mastery of the skies leaves subtle ecological imprints, teaching lessons in energy, scale, and adaptive balance. Predators that once dominated aerial niches influenced prey evolution, ecosystem structure, and even the trajectory of vertebrate flight in later lineages. Although giant wingspans and extreme aerial feats were ultimately unsustainable, the ingenuity of these experiments echoes in the subsequent evolution of flight, guiding lineages toward designs that balanced power, efficiency, and resilience. In the ephemeral dance of these airborne titans, life demonstrated that even the most daring innovations are fragile. Yet their legacy persists in the selective pressures they leave behind, hinting at the next evolutionary arena where audacity would again collide with survival. The vanishing architects of the land. Spanning the sunlit floodplains, silent mounds appeared like ephemeral monuments, crafted by creatures whose forms are now entirely lost to time. These architects were neither titans nor predators. They were organisms that sought survival through ingenuity, shaping the landscape itself to suit their fleeting ambitions. Fossil records fail to capture their existence, yet sedimentary layers, soil disturbances, and plant distribution patterns whisper of their presence, hinting at the intricate experiments of life that left no durable trace. In these vanished constructions, evolution explored a different frontier, behavior and environmental engineering as a strategy for survival. Burrows twisted beneath shifting soil, their architects unseen but profoundly influential in shaping microhabitats. Within these underground networks, temperature regulation, predator avoidance, and resource storage were attempted with remarkable precision. Yet the energy demands of excavation and maintenance often outpaced the benefits. Comparisons with extant burrowing species suggest that these extinct lineages may have developed coordinated social behaviors, temporary defensive structures, or sequential habitat manipulation strategies, all of which dissipated when population densities faltered or climatic variability intervened. Vegetation bore subtle signatures of manipulation, evidence of strategies lost to time. Branches were bent, small trees felled, and leaf litter arranged in patterns that optimized cover, humidity, or prey access. Though such activity rarely fossilizes, paleobotanical studies can detect traces in growth anomalies, localized nutrient enrichment, or sediment compression, providing a ghostly echo of life's transient engineering. These signs indicate that even minor species could exert outsized influence on their immediate ecosystems, shaping the distribution of plant and microbial communities in ways that lasted longer than the creatures themselves. Ecological niches responded in kind, with prey and predator adjusting to these brief experiments. Insects, small vertebrates, and soil organisms altered foraging routes, sheltering behavior, and reproductive timing to accommodate or exploit these environmental manipulations. Predator-prey dynamics were subtly shifted. Ephemeral burrows provided hiding spaces, while mounds and vegetation modifications could channel or trap prey, demonstrating that even failed architectural gambits reverberated across the ecosystem. Beneath the surface, microbial worlds responded to the architect's handiwork, shifting communities in patterns that would subtly reshape nutrient availability and decomposition rates. Burrowing and mound-building aerated soils, redistributed organic matter, and created pockets of enhanced moisture retention, altering fungal and bacterial colonies in measurable ways. These microscale changes, while invisible in the fossil record, propagated through the food web, influencing seed germination, detritivore abundance, and soil chemistry. Even after the architects vanished, their impact persisted in the living patterns of the earth beneath them. Structural ingenuity demanded coordination, energy, and precise environmental calibration. Excavation required repeated physical effort, careful spatial planning, and sometimes cooperation between individuals, while mound building necessitated material transport, compaction, and architectural foresight. Experimental evidence from analogous modern species suggests that such endeavors represented a significant evolutionary investment, where the cost of failure could outweigh the potential benefits of environmental control. Seasonal floods and unpredictable droughts tested the architect's ingenuity, forcing repeated modifications to mounds and tunnels in a fragile race against environmental change. Sediment layers occasionally show evidence of repeated reconstruction, suggesting that these creatures attempted to adapt structures to shifting conditions. Some lineages may have relocated burrows, reinforced weak sections, or altered tunnel orientation to maintain functionality. Yet even these flexible strategies often proved insufficient when extreme weather or resource scarcity intervened. Temporal variability amplified the risks inherent in their audacious experiments. Population stability proved elusive, with failed reproduction undermining architectural investment. Species that relied heavily on communal construction or precise environmental manipulation required synchronized breeding cycles, adequate offspring survival, and effective dispersal. Any disruption, predation, disease, or habitat alteration could eliminate both individuals and the structural knowledge encoded in their behaviors. The inability to maintain viable populations explains why these bold experiments disappeared so completely, leaving no direct fossil evidence for paleontologists to uncover. Sediment layers occasionally capture traces, faint whispers of vanished activity that hint at behaviors otherwise lost to time. Compressed plant material, uneven soil compaction, and microscopic imprints of burrowed tunnels can survive for millennia, offering rare glimpses into these vanished ecosystems. While they cannot reveal the species' identity, these subtle signatures allow scientists to reconstruct functional models of ecological experimentation, highlighting how life once pushed boundaries in form, function, and environmental manipulation. Comparative studies suggest parallels with later surviving engineers, offering indirect insight. Ants, termites, burrowing mammals, and even certain birds exhibit strategies that echo these ancient experiments, from temperature-controlled nests to mounded vegetation gardens. By analyzing these modern analogues, researchers can infer the scale, energy investment, and ecological impact of the vanished architects, appreciating how evolutionary trials often precede durable solutions. Mechanical limits of excavation, mound construction, or vegetation modification constrained evolutionary ambition. Physical strength, limb morphology, and endurance set boundaries on what could be built and maintained, while metabolic costs dictated how long and how often such behaviors could be sustained. Evolution repeatedly tested these limits, producing remarkable ingenuity for a brief moment in time before environmental and biological realities dictated abandonment. The imprint of these experiments echoes in soil composition and plant distribution, even as the architects themselves vanish. Nutrient cycling, aeration, and localized water retention were temporarily enhanced, leaving cascading effects on local flora and fauna. These transient interventions illustrate a central theme of life's experimentation. Impact is not always measured by persistence of form, but by influence on interactions and ecological processes that shape subsequent generations. Ultimately, the ephemeral nature of these architects underscores a recurring principle. Absence can speak as powerfully as presence. Their vanished mounds and burrows remind us that evolution's most daring designs are not always preserved, yet their ingenuity lingers in subtle environmental imprints, sedimentary signatures, and the behaviors of later lineages that learned from the invisible lessons of trial and error. In contemplating these lost engineers, viewers are left with a haunting reflection on life's restless experimentation, where audacity often exceeds permanence, and the most daring strategies are sometimes known only through the spaces they once occupied. Across the vanished landscapes of Earth, we have glimpsed life's audacious attempts to push the boundaries of form, function, and survival creatures that dared and failed, leaving no bones but subtle echoes in the world they shaped. Their fleeting existence reminds us that evolution is as much a story of risk, imagination, and impermanence as of triumph. In the shadows of what never endured, we sense the relentless creativity of life itself, whispering that even the boldest designs can vanish, yet leave a legacy in the silent rhythms of the world. If this journey sparked your curiosity, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.